With a homebrewed 3DS or 2DS, not only can you play any 3DS or DS game, but with emulation you can also experience a whole host of other consoles. So, let's see what this device is capable of. Hi and welcome to Bytes and Bits. The Nintendo 3DS is a great little handheld, and one of the best things about it is that it is very easy to hack it and add Homebrew, and that allows you to unlock its full potential as a retro gaming system. So if you've been following along with my Homebrew tutorials, you'll have got as far as actually homebrewing it, then being able to play all your 3DS games directly from your SD card, and also your DS games. If you haven't done that yet, please do have a look in the description down below for links off to those tutorials. But in this episode, we're going to be having a look at how we can then expand that range of consoles through to, well, pretty much any retro console you can think of. So I'm going to be looking at how we can install some standalone emulators for both the Game Boy Advance and the Super NES. And then how we can add something called RetroArch, which is sort of a multi-system emulator to really unlock the full potential so that you can emulate pretty much any console out there. We'll also have a look at the performance you can actually get out of one of these things, because obviously it's not going to emulate the new consoles. But we'll have a look. So this is an old 3DS, so pretty much anything I'm able to run in this tutorial, you'll be able to run on yours. If you have a new version, obviously that's got a more powerful processor, that will just simply unlock some of the newer systems for you to play. So let's get started and have a look at how we can turn this 3DS into a retro gaming handheld. Now, to get all these retro systems set up, you'll need to have a few things ready. So a homebrewed 3DS or 2DS of course is essential. Again, if you haven't yet hacked your console, just follow through my homebrew setup video and you'll be up and running in no time. Now, we'll be downloading and transferring files to our SD card, so you're going to need a computer with an internet connection. You'll also need a couple of applications in your 3DS setup. So you'll need the Homebrew launcher so that we can access our Homebrew apps, the Universal Updater, as this provides us with a sort of a Homebrew app store, so we can very easily download, install, and update our Homebrew programs, such as the emulators that we're going to use. And you'll also need the FBI app, so that we can use .cia installation files to easily add extra software to our console. Now, if you've followed my setup video, you'll have all of these in place. The last requirement, of course, then is some game files. Now, most likely you won't have access to original game cartridges, so you'll have to source your ROMs from elsewhere. Now, there are websites that will allow you to download software, but please do check out my retro gaming copyright video just to make sure that you stay on the right side of the laws in your region. Now, to start with, we're going to have a look at some standalone emulators. Now, standalone versions tend to give better performance and tend also to be better optimized for the systems that they run on. Now, you do of course then need to install a different emulator for each system that you want to play. So we're going to install 3 emulators this way, one for the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, then one for the Super NES, and then one for the Game Boy Advanced. Now, first of all, we'll need to get hold of some games so that they are ready for use. Now, the games that we need, they need to be in an uncompressed ROM dump. So don't include files which are zip files or any other archive files. If you download them as those, then do please extract them so that you actually get to the actual cartridge files. So for the NES games, they should be .NES files. For Super NES games, they should be .smc, and then .gba for the Game Boy Advanced files. Now, to make these available for the emulators, we simply need to put them onto our 3DS SD card. Now, if you've installed Twilight Menu, as we did when we set up for our DS games, you'll already have a ROMs folder like mine. If not, just simply create your own. So I have in the root of my SD card, I have a ROMs folder. And then inside of that, I've got a subfolder for each system I want to emulate. So I'm going to copy my NES games into the NES folder, Super NES games into the SNES folder, and my Game Boy Advance games into the GBA folder. So once I've got all of those copied across, we can go and then complete the rest of the setup actually on the 3DS console. So with our SD card back in our console, we need to start up the Universal Updater app. And again, as I said, this is basically a little sort of app store. So once that boots up, we can now come to our search console, and I'm just going to search for NES. And that should bring up a range of applications. So you can see up here, we have some Super NES stuff and some NES stuff. And the one we're after is actually this little icon here. So if I move my cursor across, you can see, and then if I go to Info, you can see we have here Virtua NES, and that's the NES emulator that we want to install. So if I click on the Downloads and then install it as a CIA, the CIA, of course, will put it onto our home screen. Confirm that. And we can see that is now downloading and getting ready. So while we're here then, we do also want to then install a couple of other emulators. So the NES emulator that we want to use is actually this one over here. There are two on here. Oh, so let's just OK that. So we have the SNES 9X here, but there is actually an updated version here. So do make sure you select the updated version. Click on the download links for that. And again, we're going to install it as a CIA file. So finally then, we want to install the Game Boy Advance emulator. So if I come and search, and I'm going to search here for GBA, and OK that. And we should then find that we have if I go to Info here, we have MBGA. That is the one that we want to install. So again, I'm going to click on there, and I'm going to install it as a CIA file. And that's our 3 emulators installed. So if I now quit out of Universal Updater app, and just make sure I close that, we should have some new software. So let's go across and see what we've got. So unwrap that one. That is our Game Boy Advance emulator. Up here, we have our Super NES emulator. And down here then, of course, we will have our Virtua NES. So let's try the Virtua NES one first. So if I just open that up. So you can see when the emulator starts then, we have our bottom screen lets us find our ROM files. And again, you can see here, it's just simply looking at our SD card. So if I use the navigation, so on the bottom screen here, all the navigation is through the buttons. So if we come down to our ROMs folder and select that, and then into our NES, you'll see we now have a set of games. So let's pick one that we want to play. So let's try for just normal Super Mario Brothers and select that. And there we have, playing on the top screen then, our Super Mario Brothers. When I'm playing a game then, in this particular emulator, if I touch the screen down here, you can see that it brings up a set of menus. So at the moment the game is paused, I can of course then resume the game. I can save my game, and what that will do is at any point that I want, so not necessarily as part of the save game inside the actual cartridge game, but I can actually save a snapshot of the game at any point that I want by just putting it in here, and then I can reload that slot at a later time. And that lets me, if I'm at a particularly hard point in any game, I can save a slot just before I get to the hard point, try the hard point. If it fails, I can then just reload that save point, and it will instantly put me exactly back to the start of that hard part in the thing, and I can just have another go at it. So some very useful things over here. And again, there's a number of other options across the top here. So you see we've got some global options here for how it all looks and displays. You can remap the controls if you want, if you don't like the button layouts, and cheats. Again, I'm not going to cover cheats in this. And if we want to, we can actually jump to a different game. So we could jump out of here and jump into Mega Man if we wanted to. Okay, so that's our NES game all set up. So if we now quit out of that and close that one, we can have a look at our Super NES one, and you'll find that this is pretty much the same as the NES one in terms of layout and so on. So again, we've got our navigation down the bottom here onto our SD card, so I can go into my ROMs, and again, we're looking for our Super NES ones here, Super NES ones. And again, I can pick out something here. So I can pick out the Super R-Type or Super Metroid. Let's click on that. And there we have it playing up in the top screen. And again, if I click on the bottom screen here, I get that same idea of our save slot, settings, controls, and so on, and jumping across to a different game. Okay. So again, for this game here, if I press start to resume the game, and there we have our Super NES game up and running. So I should be able to come into it, and off we go. Okay, so let's come out of that emulator, and let's go into our, let's close that one. And let's go into our Game Boy Advanced emulator. So again, similar sort of idea. Again, we have to find our ROM files. So if we come down to our ROMs folder, which is around here somewhere, there we go, ROMs, and then to our GBA folder, we can then pick up any game that we want. So we can go into Super Metroid. And again, we have our game running up there. On this one here, I don't think we get anything at that point. So we really just are playing the game now. So if we come in, and you can see, there we are into our Metroid on our Game Boy Advance. So it's at this point, however, that we do need to think about performance. So if we run the NES emulator, we will actually get full speed emulation. So if you look here, the game looks great, especially if we alter the screen size to fit the larger XL display. So I've done that simply by pressing the bottom screen, then going into our display settings, and then changing that to fit the display rather than just be pixel perfect. So that NES then is perfectly fine. We're going to be able to play all those games. Similarly then, if we go into the Super NES emulator, everything again is looking good and the game is running very smoothly. The sound is fine, and we can really look forward to enjoying some great Super NES gameplay. Now, one note at this point though, you will find that some games on any of these emulators won't actually work. And that's really because emulation on the 3DS isn't as well developed as on other platforms such as PC and so on. So some titles haven't yet been fully fixed and optimized to work within the emulators, and that just is something that we will have to live with. However then, if we now go on to our third standalone emulator for the Game Boy Advance, we're going to get a much worse result. So here the gameplay, you can see it's very slow, and if you listen to the sound, you'll hear that it's quite broken. So this game is almost playable, but not quite. But of course, I'm here using the original or the old version 3DS. And emulation is, of course, always going to push the limits of the host system, as it's actually running another computer system in software. So for my 3DS, or should I say Reese's, as this is actually on loan from Reese, this is now beyond the system hardware. A new version 3DS will probably run GBA emulation fine, but again, you're going to need to try out these emulators yourself to see if they will work well on your particular setup. So that's our standalone emulators all set up and working, well, mostly working. So let's start having a look now at a sort of overall emulator, and we're going to set up something called RetroArch. So the DS doesn't have a standalone emulator for every single system out there. RetroArch then is this multi-console emulator, and it has versions ported to almost every computer system you can think of. So if you've been using RetroPie on your Raspberry Pi, or Batocera, or Launchbox, or Retrobat, all of these retro gaming systems, pretty much to a man, that they run RetroArch underneath the hood. So adding RetroArch to our 3DS is going to be a great way to get as many consoles working as possible. So RetroArch works by having a series of loadable cores, and each of these cores then is able to emulate a different computer or console. Now, for this app, we're going to be installing it manually, just so you can see how to do it. So first of all, we need to get hold of the application files. So if you visit the RetroArch website, and again I'll put the links to these in the description down below, and then just go down to the downloads page. If you scroll all the way down there, you'll see all of the different systems that you can install RetroArch onto, but eventually you'll come to the section with the 3DS and 2DS links. Now there's a number of options on what you can download, so we want to download the CIA version, and we just need to download that into a folder on our PC. So once that's downloaded, simply find the file and extract the archive, and you should end up with the following files and folders sitting on your computer. And we now of course need to transfer these onto our 3DS SD card. So the .cia file is the main installation file, and you'll find that in the CIA folder. So I'm going to copy that across to my CIA's folder on my 3DS. You can actually put it anywhere you like, but this is the folder that I use for all of my installation files. And if you follow me through on my setup video, you'll have created this folder as well. So once we've got our CIA file copied across, next we then need to copy the entire RetroArch folder across to the root of our SD card. Now that's a bit bigger, so just let that copy through. And once that's done, we then need to open up that folder on our SD card, and then we're going to add a couple of new folders. So the first we want to do is to create a folder called Downloads. And it's important that you call it Downloads, as this will make it easier to find your game files inside RetroArch. So RetroArch is going to search for certain folders, and Downloads is one of the ones where it expects to find game files. So when we come to choose our game file, it will just help us get here a lot faster rather than having to navigate through the whole SD card. We also then need to put in a folder called System. Now this is where we're going to put any BIOS files that we need for some of the emulator cores. So some BIOS files, which is sort of the firmware inside a console, so some of that software is still under copyright. For example, the PlayStation 1. So RetroArch themselves aren't able to supply these files, so we're going to have to find those and add them ourselves. But with those folders in place, we now then need to get some game files. Now, of course, it's up to you how you store these game files, but I would advise creating a subfolder inside this Downloads folder for each system, and that just helps you keep everything organized. So I've already created a set of folders on my PC hard drive for each console with game files in each of these. Now RetroArch can work with some archive files, because of course sometimes you will get these ROM files coming down as zip files or something, but my advice is to actually unzip them and to just use the raw ROM dumps. So again, if I look through some of these folders, you can see just various ROM dumps sitting in there. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of these folders across to my SD card and put them in that Downloads folder, and that will then install the games. Now finally then, I'll just take you through how we can prepare some BIOS files, and we're going to work with the PlayStation 1, just so that we can then test that out on the 3DS itself. Now again, you're going to have to look for these BIOS files online, and the best method there is if you do a search for Batocera BIOS pack, that should then pop up. So this will have all of the BIOS files that you need in one download, so you can just pick out the ones that you're going to need for the systems you want to emulate. Now if we look inside this BIOS pack, there's a BIOS folder, and inside there, the PlayStation BIOS files that we need are these SCPH 5000 files. So I'm simply going to copy those across into the system folder on my 3DS SD card. Now most systems won't need these extra BIOS files, but if you run an emulator and it asks for them, well, this is the basic process that you need to go through. And if you look on the RetroArch documentation for any of the, they're called libretro cores, they will tend to tell you which BIOS files you need. So that's our SD card all set up and ready to go. So let's jump back onto the console and install this. So with our SD card back in the console, we want to start up our FBI application. And once that comes up, we'll get a list of our storage areas. So we want to go onto our SD card, into our CIAs folder, and inside there we should then find our RetroArch CIA. So we just want to come in and install that and delete the CIA file. So once that installs, which shouldn't take very long at all, we can just come out of our FBI app and back out to our home menu. And we should find once we get there that we have some new software. So of course this is going to be our RetroArch emulator. So let's start up the emulator and see what's in there. So when it first boots up, it does have to go through a little bit of setup, and then it will drop us, after a bit of a pause, so don't worry about the black screen, it will drop us into the RetroArch menu. So once we're here, we can now think, let's try out an Atari 7800 game. So of course, to do that we need the Atari 7800 core. So first off we have to load that core from the menu. We then need to find the right core in our list. So we have an Atari 7800 core sitting down here, and most of them do make sense. And we then, of course, because this is the first time we've used this core, it is going to have to install that for us. And you can see there it is just running through that installation process. So we'll just let that run through until it finishes. And once that's finished now, should be dropped back to our main menu. And once we're in our main menu, we now need to load some content. So once we click on that, you can now see that it's brought up our downloads folder that we already made. And there we have our Atari 7800 games. And let's have a go at Galaga. So let's click on that. There will be a slight pause now while it gets that game prepared to play. And there we go. You can see it's now come in, it's running the game, and we should now be able to play that. So if I press on the A button, it should start up a game. And we're now off and running our Atari 7800, and you can see we're getting really smooth animation, our sound and everything is all fine, and we can really now start enjoying the entire Atari 7800 catalogue of games. So as we install cores, you'll find that you start to get extra tiles appearing on your home menu, and each of these then is a shortcut into that particular core. So if I select the Atari 7800 icon on the home menu, it will load me straight into RetroArch with my core loaded. So all I have to do now is to go and load some content from my Atari 7800 folder. And if I then start that, I should be able to go straight into a game. So whilst we're in a game, you do have access to a menu by pressing the bottom screen. If you click that, you'll see that we get the in-game menu coming up here where we can change settings and do various things to our game. We can also create restore points and save points and so on. Or we can just simply close out of our game, and this takes us out of the emulator in quite a nice and tidy way. And we can quit completely out of RetroArch and back to our home screen. Now again, with this emulator as well, we do need to be aware of the performance of our console. So here I'm trying to set up a MAME for sort of arcade games. So I'm going to load a core for MAME 2003 Plus. So I've got a couple of ROMs that I copied across which are from that MAME set. Again, it needs to go through its installation process. Once that's complete, we can again drop in and we now have to load some content. So if I again go through my downloads and go into my MAME folder, and let's have a go at Donkey Kong. Because the Donkey Kong is in a zip file, we do need to load the archive, and sometimes it is going to ask you to reconfirm which particular core you want to use for that game. But once we get through that, we should then drop into our arcade game. And in this, as normal with MAME, we use the select button to insert a coin, and then we can use the start button to actually press the player 1 start. But what you'll find here then is we're really not getting fantastic performance here. So this is Donkey Kong, which is one of the easiest ones to emulate. But even that, on my old version 3DS, you can see that we're getting a real good slowdown, and the sound itself is pretty broken up. So this definitely does work on the new 3DS, but on this one here, you can see that we have hit sort of the limits of its capabilities. So basically then, on the performance side, with an old version 3DS, we'll be able to use RetroArch to emulate up to the 8-bit era consoles. So that will give you the Sega Master System, the Atari 7800 and 5600, and of course the Atari 2600. So various 8-bit machines. So if you do have a new version 3DS, then of course you'll be able to get up to the 16-bit era with the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Mega Drive. So please bear this in mind as you sort of play through. So that pretty much wraps it up for this video. So hopefully now you're happy installing some standalone emulators and then using RetroArch cores to bring in a whole host of other systems. If you've enjoyed this, please do click that like button and subscribe to the channel for more gaming, modding, making and coding tutorials. I look forward to seeing you again very soon, and bye for now. For more games programming, electronics projects and retro gaming, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website.